Hi, welcome back to a brand new episode in our brand new series, Next Big Fin, where we are talking to 6 fintechs and their plans to disrupt the financial industry. Today, I am very, very glad that we are joined in the studio by not one, but two really, really smart people. One is obviously Rony from GreenArc Capital, and two is Jonathan, who is the head of innovation for Julius Baer. So this is a co-hosted episode. So as we move forward, you will see John, engaging with Rony and taking a separate track to the interview. Having said that, Rony, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and the audience would love to know a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Laksh. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I'm Rony, CEO of GreenArc Capital. Been in the financial services industry for the last 20 years. Was in banking for about a decade and a half before setting up GreenArc. GreenArc is an impact investment and analytics fintech, which helps quantify the social and environmental impact created by debt portfolios. We have an impact measurement side as well as the investment itself. The latter is focused on South and Southeast Asia, while the former, the analytics business, is a software as a service business. And we have engagements in multiple continents. Happy to talk more about it as we proceed, Laksh.
Thank you. And that is exactly our plan. So, Rony, let's dive a little deeper into this. And the first time we spoke, you really captured my imagination because and I remember throwing these terms at you: how impactful is your impact investment, how green is your green investment, etc. Walk us through, why would you pick something like this? There are so many problems to solve. Why did you pick this problem to solve in the financial industry?
So thanks for asking that, Laksh. So if we wind back time before COVID, the impact investment space itself was fairly nascent in Asia. And coming from a large financial institution which has access to efficient capital, there was a challenge around identifying impact opportunities which are, one, large enough from a problem space perspective, and two, the impact itself is quantified and is measurable. That was a genuine problem. So from a large financial institution perspective, when you have to deploy financing, inherently, you cannot go after small $1 to $5 million or $10 million ticket size. Right. So there is a need for large problems which can be addressed through financing.
Right.
That is where the genesis of GreenArc was, where we could see in the market there were a number of small but high impact opportunities in various spaces: education, small business financing, etc. What we set out to do is to identify these opportunities, curate it, and take it to scale, which is large enough for institutional investment to come in.
Okay, so that is how you started. Now, let's talk about measuring the impact, because that is a very, very interesting part of the business. Why? And I've read a lot about it in the last couple of days, and I see there are, few challenges. But I want the audience to know your view of why measuring the impact is such a big challenge in debt-based investment or any kind of investment.
Okay, so a couple of background information for the audience first.
Yeah.
So if you look at the broader, what we call as the ESG investment, which is what we hear in all media these days, there's a whole spectrum that is there, from negative screening on one end, all the way to actively measuring and quantifying the impact. Now, what we are focused on is on the latter side, the impact measurement itself. There was 2 days back, there was a report that was released where globally it is estimated that now the size of the impact investment market is $1.5 trillion. Now, again, this is something that has come up in a large hockey stick sort of a manner. The growth has been fairly recent, especially in the region. Now, if you look at the literature behind on impact investments, the number one problem that investors face in this space is identifying good opportunities or good assets, impact assets. So quantifying and curating those assets can be quite challenging. There are too many standards out there. At the same time, there is no standardization.
Right.
So there is a need for a lens to be put to curate these assets before it is placed in front of investors for them to choose on proceeding with the investments. So that is where the quantification focus came for us.
Okay, and fantastic. Let's dive a little deeper. Walk us through like a project where you are curating, you are measuring the impact. There are all these different standards from UN and all these, GII and all of these guys, right? Walk us through a project and the life cycle of a project. How would you start? How would you curate? How would you measure impact? And then how would you take it to the investor? So let's go from there then.
All right. Let me talk about a project that is currently going on in the US. This is a racial justice themed project. There is a foundation in the US which has put together a consortium of 20 lenders, banks, CDFIs, credit unions, etc., to look at bringing credit into segments of society which have been left out from the credit ecosystem, and specifically with a racial lens. So immigrants, people of color, and so on, who haven't previously had access to financing, to bring credit to these segments of society.
Right.
Now, we engaged with this foundation about 2 years back, and that is when they were curating this program. And we worked with them to identify what are the metrics that are critical for the program. And that was the starting point for us. Through the program, we engaged with the lenders to understand more about them, as well as the segments that they're going after. By that, what I mean is it could be individuals, it could be small businesses, it could be financing focused on education, or the various themes that fall under impact. And in this case, it's social impact. And what we agreed with the participants in the program was the format of the data. We'll come to that in a bit, because data can be quite a challenge in these projects. And we agreed on what is a format in which the data will be gathered. And it is particularly important when there are multiple participants involved. And once that was identified and the data that we require, the fields that we require are part of this data set, that is the first part of the problem that is solved. The second part is the processing. Now, what we have done is the various frameworks that I was talking about, and what you mentioned, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the GIN Iris Plus catalog of metrics, etc. There are a plethora of these standards and frameworks and metrics that are there. What we have done is to put them together into a framework which is codified into our solution, into the technology solution. So historically, what has been done is a consultant will be engaged. You look at a subsample of these portfolios and create a detailed impact report. So it's typically a narrative. Now, what we have done is turn the problem on its head, where we look at the entire data, and this can be done very efficiently in loan data, given the consistency of the data that is there. We pass through the system, and the output is gathered as analytics, which can be displayed on a dashboard or converted into reports.
Right.
Now, in this case, the 20 lenders, it's very large volume. It's millions of loans that are there.
Right.
We can efficiently process this and create the analytics in a manner that is useful for these lenders to take it back to their stakeholders, as well as for the program to see how successful has the intervention been because of the program.
And that is a lot to process. So you get all the stakeholders together, you say we need this data, all the data comes in, and then you obviously run analytics based on that. Is this all done after the loans have been dispersed to, in this case, people of color and those who have not had access to the financial, services previously? Or is this done before or after the loan has been dispersed?
So that's actually a key question, because in impact, you have the ex ante and ex post view. So what we provide is the ex ante view, which is when you are giving out the loan, you get a view on how impactful will this loan be.
Okay.
Of course, you can monitor it along the way, and that is what is intended with impact programs. It is not at the outset only, but also along the way, how has the financing created a change? Now, that is quite key, because impact does not get created overnight. It's not a quarterly process. It's typically in years.
Right.
So a program like this, in this case, the pilot itself is 2-year program. So through that, every quarter we produce these reports or these analytics, which will show a view in terms of through the financing for the additional financing that is provided, what is a change in the life of the entity or the borrower that has been created.
No, and this is exactly like, this is wonderful, because if you had said, like, we calculate after everything is done and then we give you a score, which is a good use case, but a better use case is when you are looking at every loan that you're putting out and you're thinking, how is this really aligned to the strategy or really aligned to the mission we have? Fantastic. And this seems, not to undermine any work you have done, this seems that anybody who's trying to get access to a credit line like this, like the large institutions going to even larger institutions and saying, listen, guys, we are going to do this $200, $400 loans to these people, if not have access. It seems like they should have something in place already, right? Because they're going out and saying we are doing impact investing. So they should already have something in place. Why is there a need for ARC?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question, right? So if you look at a lot of the lending that happens, especially in emerging markets, it's impactful in nature. So the social impact tends to be quite high. So in the region, if you were to take an example of India, the government has mandated priority sector lending. So a large volume of that is towards agri or education or housing, etc. All of this is impactful loans. If you look at microfinance lending in the region in Southeast Asia, there is a very large number of microfinance institutions that are there. If you look at FinTech lenders who provide access, who have actually created this niche over in this region, and there are hundreds of them that are there, which go after specific segments. Small business is one of them. These are all high impact, purely if you were to consider nothing else, the fact that they did not have previous access to financing. There's no credit history. So that itself is high impact. Now, the challenge, though, is unlike a market like Europe, where it's a lot more established, the thinking behind impact is a lot more established, and the demand for the impact products are there from patient capital. The market in Asia, especially, is not that developed.
Yeah.
So as much as you might have pockets of this in the various segments that I mentioned, to put that under a label which is impact investments, it hasn't reached that maturity yet. Now, if you look at investors who are trying to access the emerging markets, Asia or Africa, etc., the challenge is curating or getting access to this curated assets. And by that, what I mean is it could be impactful, but somebody has to do the hard work and curate those assets. So that is not there. The market is not developed yet. And pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, there is a big change that we can see. So, for example, when we started off, first couple of years in the market, people used to be confused with what we do. The term impact investments did not used to ring a bell. People used to ask, are you by any chance a charity? There were all sorts of interesting questions we used to get. So once the market reaches a certain level of maturity, that is when the demand for this and the structure around this becomes a lot more pronounced.
No, and I understand. Let me ask you this question in a different tone. How probable it is for an impact fund to go out and invest in a non-impactful debt scheme, or what is the percentage of an impact fund that goes into something which looks impactful but is not?
Yeah, so broadly that would be called as impact washing. So if you are launching a fund and investing in assets which are namesake impact but not necessarily, it does happen a lot more than what you would imagine. So, and that is also the reason why a lot of the regulations have started to come in to rein this in. Again, the most advanced of these regulations are in the Europe, the SFDR regulations, which have put investments into various buckets where you need to qualify. Are you actually an impact investment? If that is the case, there are certain criteria around the PAIs, the indicators that you need to measure against. Now, that is when the market matures. In an earlier stage, if you look at Asia being an example of it, where it's a slightly earlier stage, there are a lot more funds you would see where they would paste in their brochure, they would paste the Sustainable Development Goals, we are 1, 3, and 5 aligned, for example, because we are investing into these sectors. That is actually not enough. You do need to quantify what is the additionality that you are creating, which is because of the intervention, what otherwise would not have happened. Quantify that. That is what is required. So to your question, does it happen that people are claiming and investing into sectors or into opportunities which are not necessarily impact? Absolutely, yes.
And thank you. That I can't tell you how impressed I am with what you have built. Like this is like identifying a problem, just going out and solving this. And it is a hard problem to solve because of the data involved, because of the time. There is always a time lag between when you invest and when there is getting all this together, having like all of these platforms, all of these regulation coming to the same platform, understanding them, implementing them on a pre-loan basis. So basically somebody comes in and you just say, yep, this is within our impact measurement, as framework. From an impact measurement point, go ahead and then you have all the other checks, etc. Absolutely wonderful. Now let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey. You have to always, go through hells of, the gates of fire, etc. What has been the biggest challenge in building something which is so unique?
Yeah. When you ask an entrepreneur what is the biggest challenge, there'll be a long list that'll come in. So I need to really filter that down to say what,
Make it 2 or 3 big challenges, please. This is your stage. Like take your time to, explain this thing, please.
Yeah. So one of the challenges I already mentioned is, especially when you in the tech space, right? Where when you go to investors, there's a need for comparability. So what are the competitors that are there?
Yeah.
And when the space itself is very niche and early, finding comparables can be quite a challenge.
Yes.
Especially early days when we were in the space. When we were setting this up, this was quite a problem that was there, where investors could not understand. And by that I mean VC investors on the equity side, not on the debt side. The VC investors, they struggle to understand what is a comparable, how do you put a valuation to the company, etc. That is a big problem. And it sounds, on hindsight, it sounds a lot, it's quite trivial, but that is quite an education process that you need to go through to find potential comparables, maybe in the broader ESG space, maybe credit analytics companies, etc. That is the way we have overcame that to some extent. The other one is more of a geographical challenge. So given our investors were from the US, we were lucky to get access to the US market fairly early. And being a Singapore company, to access the market and do business development over there, that can be quite daunting.
Yeah.
Very different dynamic over there.
Yeah.
Now, from a challenge perspective, while that was daunting, I thoroughly enjoyed the entire US experience. The market itself, the dynamic is quite different. The access that you get and the sort of risk appetite that is there in the US, that's quite different from what we see in the region.
Yep. And when John is speaking to you, please tell him about what banks in Asia and innovation people in Asia can do differently. And but this is fantastic. Obviously, you're building out a category. To give VCs credit where it is due, everybody goes and says, we have no competitors. So for them to understand and believe this is obviously a little bit more difficult. You work with financial institutions and government organizations, right? When you reached out to them as a customer, not as a venture investor, but as a customer to take the analytics from you, what were the problems that you were facing with them? What was that journey like? Did they even identify that this was a problem that they're going to face?
Yeah, so financial institutions tend to be, the plus of financial institutions is the scale that they bring. The minus is the speed at which typically they move. So the initial engagements that we had, especially in the region, one of our earliest clients were BNP Paribas. And in the ecosystem in Singapore, one of the big benefits that fintechs have is the support from MAS.
Nice.
So the the technology innovation programs, the grants that are there, that really opens up the market for you.
Right.
And that gives you a lot of credibility. Now, the reason why financial institutions are risk averse is typically because they don't, it's quite difficult. Having been on the other side, I can say it is quite difficult to evaluate, is this a genuine startup who will be around for a few years?
Yep.
Or is this, one of those we talk to and 6 months later they are struggling? So that's a genuine problem that they face. Now, if you have a proposition which resonates with financial institutions, and in our case, impact investment is something that European institutions, BNP and so on, understood quite well. So the pitch itself was not that complicated. Now, finding a proof of concept, that is where the challenge can be quite often. Something that is big enough that it'll attract interest from them. At the same time, find a small enough project which can be executed to have a quick success.
Yep.
And so in the case of, and that is exactly what MAS's grant programs have done quite nicely, identify a very time-bound, deliverable-based program.
Yeah.
Which you can work with a partner organization, and you implement that. From there, you identify the next steps and scale that. And that's what worked out well for us.
Actually, I'll tell you, you're giving yourself less credit than it is due. And the reason for that is when you were talking through this journey, yeah, and I work in the financial industry and on the fintech side as well. I think a lot of fintechs don't really recognize the one thing that you recognize very, very quickly. Who doesn't need a sales pitch? You going to BNP Paribas because of their European background in understanding the impact investment side of things was a big win already, even before you started. Because you don't want to start from why you should calculate the impact of impact investing. Then you are educating them in the process, which obviously you'll have to do it in a lot of cases. But for client 1, 2, 3, 4, you really want to go to somebody. So I think a lot of credit to you to, identifying a client like that, and MAS having these, innovation grants, etc. They are actually very, very wonderful. If you guys have not, seen about those, like go on the website, read them. I think they are a very big boost to the whole ecosystem because it de-risks the project from the financial institution's perspective, from monetary, obviously. And then it also gives the fintech that lifeline of getting into the ecosystem and executing and proving themselves. So absolutely, like, full marks to them. And on executing that, on building that up, that whole grant system. So great work. Moving on to your own journey, now you work with so many different banks, etc. And the challenge of being a fintech is your investors want you to move fast, but your customers want to move as slowly as possible. And John, is obviously the right person to have. Walk us through the struggles of a fintech entrepreneur from that perspective. Like, how do you balance one part being running at like supersonic speed and then the other part being in so much inertia? How do you even balance that as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laksh. It's actually a genuine problem compared to, say, consumer technologies and so on, right? Or e-commerce, where there is a scale that comes much faster. So fintech, that is an inherent problem that is there. And that is where you also need to plan your business development well. Now, in our case, pretty early on, we realized that in Asia, the scale, especially for the impact measurement business, would not come in quite easily because of the lack of understanding the scale, the multiple other issues that we were seeing in the market, which is where we decided to pivot to US to explore whether there was an opportunity over there. And that was a key decision. So identifying the right market, it is sort of like, if you're going to a supermarket and you are joining the wrong queue, you'll end up waiting for the longest time.
Yeah.
So identifying the right queue is actually quite key. And the market can be segmented in multiple ways, right? So that is quite important, that you identify where you're going to go after. You might have a great product, but you have to go after that right market. And also, especially today compared to 10 years ago, the technologies are quite different. So the ability to deliver solutions across borders is actually quite easy, barring data privacy challenges, etc.
Yeah.
So earlier this year, we got an opportunity through a partner in Singapore to work on a project in Africa. Now, think of it. If you have to set up an entire shop in another continent, another country, and work over there, this will probably take years to make it happen. But today, and the credit to the ecosystem, as well as the ability to deliver SaaS projects cross-border, if you're ready to partner with organizations in a manner that is lucrative for everybody, the scale can come quite quickly.
Yeah. No, and a fantastic answer. And it shows the maturity of your maturity as an entrepreneur, not only in understanding your markets, but also pivoting very quickly. If you were to go back and you could do one thing differently, what would that be?
So COVID was one of those
Black Swan events.
Yeah, Black Swan events, which, of course, nobody could have anticipated, and it's certainly not going to be the last of these Black Swan events, right? So for us to, what I did not mention at the beginning is the technology solution that we built was initially meant for in-house consumption. So it was meant for our own lending portfolios quantification of impact.
Yeah.
Now, through the COVID journey, we realized that lending moratoriums or debt moratoriums were there in place in the region, and we could not start our lending programs yet.
Yeah.
And that was a good year and a half. At the same time, we had a technology product, which was very niche and was not there in the market at all. We built it because we couldn't find an alternative.
Yeah.
So to identify that need and go to the market and deploy that as a standalone solution, that was something. As an entrepreneur, it took us a bit of a courage and a lot of nudge from our investors to segregate that and push that out as a SaaS model.
Yeah,
that is something I would strongly encourage people who are looking at launching new products to keep an open mind. It is like the hand that you are dealt with. You should look at it from various perspectives to see where you can maximize the value, not just from this is what we set out to do, but what are the opportunities that are there today? Is there an opportunity to pivot and pilot something and see whether there is value you can create into the ecosystem?
That is, that resonates with me at so many levels. I'm an ex-entrepreneur, and you say, and you're absolutely right. Approach this with an open mind. It is a hard journey. You have convinced yourself that this is what I want to build. And then you go on that journey, and now, suddenly 12, 18 months, you are looking at this different path, which you're not completely convinced about. It is hard. And this is a challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs face. Thank you for sharing that. Kata, the company now, the cap table company, they wanted to be a private exchange to, facilitate liquidation on private firms. And, they are this, and I was reading this quote from there that he's like, I did not start out for building a cap table firm, but it is so sticky that this is about who we are. So thank you, for sharing that. And when you say, it was a little bit obvious that when you were talking about this being an internal impact measurement, because that is why I was asking you that why are these different impact funds not building something similar to, what you built? It seems so logical. It needs, like, you have to access all these lines of credit. You have to prove. Why would they not build it? So, but let me ask you this question a little different. You are accessing standards, which are standards, so everybody has access to them. The data that is being brought in is brought in by the impact lender or, stuff. How defensible is this idea?
Yeah. So one of the elements of this impact measurement, and one of the reasons why we focused on loan markets, is because loan data around the world is the same because of the various credit related regulations that are there. It's the same data that is gathered by all financial institutions. The fields that are called might be different, but it's basically the same data. So scalability is there. Now, that is one aspect. The other one is when you have a lot of high volume data, you can start to use the data for various advanced purposes. And by that, I'll give you an example. One of the projects that we did in Asia was around impact audit. So basically looking at historical data to identify patterns in the data to recognize if there are aberrations, and potentially if there are loans which might be different from normal, you can identify this could be impact washed. So you need further investigation over there. Now, this is effective when you have historical data. So as you get more data, the platform becomes stronger.
Right.
The algorithms that you can create will be stronger. The patterns that will identify will be stronger. So a new entity who might come and create the same, they will have the challenge of not having this initial data. And as you get more sectors, more geographies, this becomes stronger. The platform becomes stronger and stronger.
So first of all, kudos to you for building this network effect, which will also help out, your future customers, etc. I have a couple of other questions for you. One, if there is one thing you could change in this entire, impact investing space, right? No constraints. What would that one thing be?
Yeah, for me, that is actually something I've been thinking about quite a bit. And I mentioned a number of standards that are there in this space. So think of impact investments or impact measurement sort of like credit markets or audit before the standards came in. So think back 50, 70 years back. So it's the same sort of a journey it is going through. The standardization is coming, the regulations are coming. Now, one of the most used frameworks is the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is so thoroughly overused and abused that there's a lot of impact washing that happens. There were various terms: greenwashing, impact washing, rainbow washing, that is used because of the various colors of the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what the UNDP has done, and we've been working quite closely with them, is to come up with something called the SDG impact standards.
Yeah.
And there is a ISO standard that is work in progress.
Yeah.
I'm on the committee from a Singapore perspective, and that is something that I'm very keen on having that being rolled out in the market. So the benefit of that would be, if one were to claim as an organization or as an investor, if you were to claim, you will need to evidence it. And it's not just about post-facto reporting saying that, oh, I'm aligned to these SDGs, but you're really looking at from a decision and a strategy perspective and building it into systems and having the governance in place so that the final reporting would be just a nice to have, not just the primary thing that you're looking to have a picture painted saying that we are these SDG focused. These standards coming out, I think that would be something to look out for.
Thank you. And you have answered like a couple of questions that I had for you. The follow-up was about, how could this industry do better? And I think absolutely, please keep, doing the great work you are doing. What I will do for now is I will invite John into the studio, and then John will talk to you. And, obviously you guys have a lot in common. So I am keenly looking forward to the conversation. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Laksh, for having me for this, to co-host the next Big Fin review. It's been fantastic, and it's great that now I have a chance to have a chat with Rony. And Rony is I think first time we're meeting, so that's fantastic. Really looking forward to understanding a little bit more. But before we start, really love to hear what's your elevator pitch.
Thanks, John. Very nice to meet you, and thanks for having me here. So to talk about GreenArc and our pitch to assuming that you're a financial institution that we are pitching to, the elevator pitch is really when you have an impact product and you want to quantify the change that you're creating and align to global standards, we use our technology solution to objectively look at the data that you have to quantify the impact and produce the analytics. And the output is in an efficient manner, an online dashboard, as well as a report that you can use with your stakeholders.
And is this a platform itself, or is it something that runs in the back end? How does that work?
So the solution itself is provided as a platform. There is an API integration. There is a backend which processes all the data. It is up to the financial institution, the client, how they want to consume it. It can be as an online dashboard. It can be as a API which integrates into your front end, or as a report that is customizable.
Okay, so if I articulate back to you, essentially you use AI, aggregate a huge amount of data, and provide reports and insights for financial institutions to create new products. Am I right to say that?
Right to say. At the same time, the use of AI, the word AI is terribly overused these days. So that's not something that we would go out and tell the financial institution, because it does not matter whether it's AI or otherwise. But yes, it uses machine learning data, elements of data science to find patterns from lending data and create analytics for quantifying the impact of financial institutions' lending portfolios.
Understand. And would that then translate into something related to, say, a new product, or is it something that they use actually to manage the portfolio itself more? And from your client's perspective,
it is actually both. So there are, if you look at the client use cases, there are clients. One of the interesting ones was a government institution in the US, where they were doing a lending program for 6 years. This is a part of the state small business credit initiative, very large federally funded program. For the state itself, there was a small business financing that was there, and they were at the tail end of the phase 1 of the program, and they needed to tell that story. They knew it was high impact loans, and they needed to tell that story. That's where we came in to look at the past 6 years data to create a impact report and showed them what is a deficit that is there, so that for the new product that they were creating, which was kicking off in 6 months' time, they could gather the additional data that was required to design a more effective program. So it can be retrospective or it can be looking forward.
Well, it's a very niche problem statement. So I've been doing corporate innovation for quite a while now, and I've seen a lot of startups, a lot of fintechs, a lot of insurtechs, a lot of, even at one point in time as well, food and agriculture tech, and it's very interesting to see, your problem statement itself. That's what you mentioned to Laksh earlier as well, right? It's quite niche in that sense. How did you come to this conclusion that you will say, I'm going to solve this? This is a problem I want to solve as an entrepreneur. How did you actually come to that point?
So, John, the problem itself that we started to look at was the impact investments, where there is a lack of scale in impact investments. So we dove into this space. We dived into this space without deciding what is a solution we are going to be giving. It was a problem itself that we are looking at. And as I was mentioning to Laksh, the problem itself is a couple of aggregated problems. One is a lot of high impact opportunities which are too small for institutional ticket size. And that is quite important because institutions are the ones who have efficient access to capital. Now, bringing efficient capital into this space requires scaling these high impact opportunities. So putting these opportunities together and putting an impact lens and scaling that is what we were going after. Now, we did not decide that we are going to create a tool to solve this problem. When we got into this with the idea of bringing financing, that we were looking at who are the service providers, who are the solutions out there who could measure and put this impact lens on this existing credit data. And we couldn't find any. There are consultants who are doing it on a bespoke, very expensive bespoke basis, but that would not scale, especially for debt portfolios, which goes into millions of loans. So this was a solution that was created as part of a problem that we were facing after we got into the journey, not as, build and they will come sort of a mindset.
Good, but how did you get to that point in terms of starting that journey? You spent quite a number of years in banking,
yes.
Right? And was it something that you saw within banking, or did you get this epiphany somewhere else?
No, it was very much within banking. So my co-founder Bikram and myself, both of us were in banking for a long time. Bikram used to be the head of credit markets, and the additional hat he had was looking at impact as a practice. At that time, most banks did not have impact as a business line. And for me, I came from a program management background and crossed paths with Bikram on a specific impact project with WWF in China. After that, there was a project in Indonesia. There was something in Singapore. There were multiple projects that we did. And the common theme that we saw across various projects were, while there are some large ticket opportunities where a bank can take part, that is an important point, because the reason why banks quite often cannot participate is because if it is, let's say, a sub $50, $75 million financing opportunity, it would be a loss-making proposition for a large financial institution, which sounds a little out of the ordinary, but that is the way the economics work because of the costs that are involved for a large bank. So with a large bank who has access to efficient capital perspective, when we are looking at it, we realize this problem of impact investments cannot be solved if you sit within a large financial institution and look at it from a traditional perspective. You really need to go ground up to identify these opportunities and aggregate it with an impact lens so that you can bring efficient capital. So that is a backstory.
Wow. Sounds like quite a path to get to where you are. GreenArc has been around for quite a number of years now, and you've had quite a lot of success in terms of working with large corporates and large organizations. Can you tell me about how you've gone through that and how you've actually achieved that success there, in terms of partnering with these banks? You shared earlier with Laksh around some of the use cases that you worked on, some of the examples. But what was that secret sauce that you had, right, from being able to actually get in and be able to be successful? Because we see so many of these fast startups, fintechs, trying, right, to get into and working with a corporate, and the challenge of selling a B2B solution, right, it's not easy, right? It's a long tail, it's a long tail conversation.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, John. So the problem that you mentioned is very much so in the financial industry and fintech space, and no different for us as well. I don't know whether there's a single secret sauce, but I can tell you a few things that has worked well for us. Pretty early on, we realized that unlike when you are in a large institution, and you'll know this very well, your card will open doors, your name card will open doors. You step out of an organization, the next day onwards, the cards that you print do not open doors. People do not return calls. So you do need to build out that credibility from scratch. And there are a few elements that have worked well for us. One is, of course, the network we've created pre-setting up the company. That has certainly helped us quite a bit. There were a number of individuals and organizations who helped us through that journey. At the same time, the ecosystem worked quite well for us. From that sense, the financial or the fintechs in Singapore are quite lucky. MA, as we spoke about, that the FSTI, the Financial Services Technology Innovation Program, that's a great way to get some visibility and name in the market. Similarly, there are other government institutions who are waiting for you to ask for help. The other institution that has worked very well for us, especially in our expansion to the US, is Enterprise Singapore. So they have a program around taking not just startups, but organizations, any organizations who are looking to expand into a new geography, to provide them the support, including business development support and grants, to make sure that you have set up your office and you've set up your team in the new geography. That has worked out quite well in terms of introductions, etc. Having investors in the right geographies, that helps also. One of our investors is Franklin Templeton, and they have an office in the middle of Silicon Valley. That is as good as it gets. And last year, I spent a lot of time in their office, flying back and forth from Singapore. And the doors that opens, especially with the clients that visit their innovation office, that has been phenomenal for us.
So I know the FT team pretty well. They're phenomenal in that sense. And what was it? You've done so many over the last couple of years. When was the first? I'd like to understand a bit more around your first client. Right, the first paying customer that you had. How long did it take you from the single first conversation to when it actually went live?
So the first customer itself, I'll consider the POCs also, the paid POCs also as customers. So this was a pretty unique case where there's a Japanese financial institution of a reasonable size who had a fairly large lending portfolio in the region across South and Southeast Asia. And they were starting to they were educated to some extent on impact, and they were quite keen on launching a product which was fit for the market. But they did not have the expertise to quantify the impact. That's where we were engaged to have that conversation. And this was through the COVID time when, as I was mentioning earlier with Laksh, where we also realized that there is a standalone demand for this product, not just for in-house purposes. So we engage with them, and they ask, we'll give you a Cambodian portfolio. Can you look at that and see whether you can quantify the impact so that we can take it back to our board to get a go-ahead to launch a $50 million fund for the region. Now, that was quite eye-opening for us because that is a use case which is quite scalable. Now, earlier you were asked around when in the journey of a financial product does it fit in? And this is one of those where in the designing phase, you can actually come in and say, instead of hiring a full-time chief impact officer who could cost a couple of $100,000 every year, you could actually try it out and create a sample portfolio, which you can put in front of investors to get the demand. So before you launch a $50-100 million product, you can actually create the analytics that is required so that it's a lot more tangible, so that you can whet the appetite of the investors who are coming in for your larger product.
And how long did it take for that conversation to happen?
So the initial pilot itself took about 3 months or so. And the conversations happened over about 3 months. And the pilot itself was fairly quick. It is a 1 month pilot for us because the processing is not complicated through our system. So that took about a month to get the reporting out. And that is, I'm anticipating another question around what is a typical life cycle. It varies really depending on the size of the organization. So earlier I mentioned one of the larger engagements we are doing for a consortium of 20 lenders in the US. That took a good 9 months for the project itself from the initial discussion to signing of the contract. So, but that's a large engagement. It's 20 lenders and consolidated. So there's a number of moving pieces, cross-border data issues, a number of aspects that needed to be ironed out. But it varies between, the shortest could be 1 month to 9 months, depending on the scale.
It's, you're a lot more mature already, right? In the sense of, 6-7 years now in the market, paying customers. In the early days, and I'm going back to your early days because I want to give, people who are listening to this, right? Our colleagues in the industry who are trying to understand how to work with fintechs. What are the challenges that you face as well, right? And how do you actually go about solving some of those? And for you, I think my next question will really come down into who was it that really pushed it through for you? Was it an innovation team? Was it someone from the business side? Was it somebody in technology? Was it the CEO? Who was that initial entry point? What was it that worked for you in that sense?
Yeah, I can see with your innovation hat why you would ask that question. And having been there myself pre-GreenArc, that's actually a very key point because regardless of the ecosystem, which geography you go to, this is a challenge or an understanding that you need to have to know who to sell to. And there is no single answer for that, right? For us, the buy-in from the regional management helped for our initial clients who were bought into doing the innovative, to bring in something innovative into a traditional business. So having that buy-in from a senior management who has oversight across the various elements of the bank. And as much as we talk about a bank as a single monolith, all of us know that is not the case. You are basically talking to various teams, which works in silos in most of the cases. And selling across that can be done if you have senior management buy-in. So if you can get access to somebody over there, and in the case of many of the organizations that we worked with, that helped quite a bit to get senior management buy-in so that there will be sponsorship from not just from financial perspective, but also from a buy-in perspective, so that the friction that inevitably will be there with any engagement, there is incentive on the other side to make this happen.
And I guess you're right, because the reality behind it is that, I don't believe that anybody actually has the incentive to change, to want to change, right? Everybody says they want to, but to actually do it, it takes a huge amount of effort, right? And moving that whole, having to change your processes, having to change, documentation, even, on a day-to-day basis, how you do things, right? That's not an easy step.
Not at all. And for that matter, if you add on a little further, right, this is where the nuance comes in. So if you go to an organization which is not mature enough, for, let's say from an impact perspective, right, we will struggle in terms of getting traction because they are not converts yet. But if you go into an organization which is too mature, where you have a chief impact officer, the chief impact officer could be worried their job could be at risk. So the impact reporting that they are currently doing could get automated. So you really need to have that narrow, the middle ground where you're actually aiding the person who is going to be using this. At the same time, you're not putting their job at risk.
But it's about enablement, right? Using technology, using new platforms, using new data sets, right? To be able to change the way you operate and be more efficient about it, right? So that you can do bigger things, right? And that in a sense is really a mindset thing, right?
Very much. So to give you another example, there was I can name this, it's in the public domain. So Barclays is an organization that we worked with as part of their RISE program. And they have a very large target that they have in terms of sustainable financing that they need to provide. So the pitch that we gave them was, of course, you are looking at launching new products, but we've seen from various organizations in the past that you could actually be already sitting on very high impact assets, which are not quantified yet. You have an opportunity to look at those portfolios quite efficiently and identify maybe your microfinance portfolio in Africa or your small business portfolio in UK to see maybe that is already high impact. You could be already sitting on $100 billion of impact product. So quantify that so that from that sense, in that innovation, which is not necessarily from a technology innovation perspective, but from a business process innovation. If you can think from that perspective, the benefit that you can get from a visibility to your clients, or even in terms of the targets that you've already announced, achieving that can be a big success for financial institutions.
And how did you sell that? You did something with them, right? And how did you sell that internally for them?
So again, over there, we got lucky, I would say. As part of the program, they assigned a senior manager over there. So to, any of these organizations, this is human nature, unless you have somebody telling you, it's two reasons why you would do something, right? One is there is really, your life is going to be much, much better. And it's obvious that it's going to be better if you were to use like an Uber app comes, you will use it. The other one is somebody tells you, and then you look at it, then you realize, okay, this is worthwhile doing that, which is what sponsors do, executive sponsors do in banks. In our case, that's what it was. We got a senior sponsor who connected us to various departments, the country heads, the business heads, with whom we could start a conversation. Sitting outside, navigate any large organization without a sponsorship, it is, I don't want to say impossible, but it's pretty close to that.
And what advice do you have for someone like myself, whose day job objective is to find new solutions, to bring them in, help the organization change itself? What advice do you have for innovation teams or people who are going out, scouting, meeting with startups, meeting with fintechs, trying to find new avenues, right? I'd love to hear your perspective. As you mentioned, I give my name card, people want to call me back, right? Because they want to have an opportunity to work with the organization. But what's your viewpoint?
So, John, I would answer that from a few perspectives. So innovation, as you run a very successful innovation program and a lab out of Asia. So I don't know how much advice I can give you, but let me give you from an entrepreneur perspective first. So one of the challenges that entrepreneurs face is to get a client which you can use the logo of, and at the same time have the money coming in, because that is quite key for various aspects. One is running the firm, and of course for raising the next round of capital. Now, financial institutions quite often say, oh, we don't have the budget for it. The reality is it's not a shortage of money. It's a matter of which pocket is it sitting on. And some of the best run programs I've seen, including some of the names that we spoke earlier, they have innovation budgets, and that sits centrally rather than with the business. Now, if that person who has that budget can be the sponsor for the program itself. Now, you spend a lot of effort to curate or identify these startups you want to work with. Now, if there's a budget associated with that, very similar to the MAS's grant program, if there's a budget, it doesn't have to be a very large number, right? If there's a budget, it is much more easier for fintechs to work with these organizations. That's one. The other one I would answer from financial institution perspective. Now, especially from the challenge that central organization like the innovation organizations faces, when you have when you find innovative programs, and very true for the likes of AI, etc., when you put in for a POC versus the steady state, the performance difference that might be there can be severe, much to do with how much training that you do with internal data sets, etc. Now, if you have business lines who are not ready to take that risk, and I've seen that where they come in and say, oh, you need to have 99% accuracy on day one. That is not going to happen. So that risk appetite needs to be there, where there is a sandbox where you can try it out for some period of time, that you will not be making money at that time. It is, you can consider it as an investment during that period of time. If you have that appetite for that investment, you will reap very large rewards by taking that risk.
And, it's funny because I have a couple of stories on this, right? The budget one is interesting. You've been in a corporate as well, right? Budgeting cycles is on a yearly basis, right? You miss the cycle, you wait another year, right? So it's one that we're also starting to look at in terms of how you time your POC to prove the value so that you can get the budget for the next year, because nobody has money lying around, right? Every budget is fully utilized in terms of there is initiatives already ongoing. And the second point that you mentioned really around it's funny because this exact thing, right? The business always asks, they want 99% when you talk about AI. The reality behind it is that I think if you get closer to 80-85%, you're actually in a very good space already, right?
And if you're ready to invest that time, it will get to 90 plus percentage, but you need to give that time. I can talk about stories from my previous life, but I'm sure all of us have been through this, where especially true for AI, where you need to give that time, the training that needs to be the data set. If you're not ready to put in the effort, commit the resources, not just money in terms of data and the people, if you're not ready to, you will not have innovation coming into your teams. So that's a call out to the business lines to take that risk. You will see the benefits. And you're seeing in very large numbers, especially with the newer elements of AI that are coming in, the agentic systems, etc. The benefits that can be reaped if you are ready to invest can be significant.
It's interesting because I was just discussing this topic around, what is that business case for it, right? And today, I think it's still very early. The hypothesis everybody has is that there will be an impact. And I personally believe that there will be an impact. Now, how do you quantify it, right? I think that quantifiable measure is going to be quite challenging. But maybe if I think about it in a sense, right? How do you quantify the impact that GreenArc brings for your corporate clients?
Yeah, so that's the key element of a pitch that you make, right? So there are, given the various use cases that are mentioned, it can vary quite a bit. So for some of the, without naming the client, I can talk about one specific example where there was a government entity who had run the program and they needed the story to be told. And so happened that the governor elections were coming up. So we had a great opportunity to showcase or to let the financial team, the senator and team, showcase the success of their lending program by quantifying the impact. So the reporting that the analytics and the reporting that we provided, that is an objective third party aligned to global standards. So it is not the government coming out and touting their horn. It is somebody from outside and even outside the country who is coming in and saying, here is the impact that is created. Now that cannot be quantified in terms of dollars, but the value of that can be significant. That's the reporting side of it.
But in innovation, a lot of times, right, we're always asked the question, what is the impact, right? And there's two ways to look at it. There's the quantitative, which I think is the easy one, and of course the qualitative aspect, right? And it's a balance, right? As an entrepreneur, as someone who works very closely with large organizations, right? Do you see this tension point coming up often?
I wouldn't call it so much of a tension point. I think it is more of being tuned in to listen to the client. So in a conversation, you will go in with maybe 3 or 4 different angles based on the research you've done. At the same time, the success would really come in if you're ready to listen. So if you're harping on or pressing the button and you don't see much interest over there, at the same time, if you can listen in and see what are they trying to solve, what is their problem points, that is when you can potentially, and that's a benefit of earlier stage companies, you have the ability to create something which is customized. And the early customers would actually give you also more perspectives in terms of how can you build out the product further, rather than saying, this is what you have, take it or I'm out.
Got it. And that kind of segues into the next question I have for you, really about your own entrepreneurial journey. When you started GreenArc, you had a hypothesis of what you wanted to do. How different is it today?
So I would say very different. So when GreenArc, when we set out to do GreenArc, it was primarily meant as a financing organization. So the technology angle itself was more around the lending, the aggregation of the lending data, and providing that as a platform to larger institutions to look at that data and choose portfolios for lending. That has changed significantly. There are two personalities to the business now. One is the lending itself, and the other one is the impact measurement. The latter was not something that we foresaw at all. That is organically that got created. And that is what I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 or 3 years to build out and expand into additional geographies as well. So from a starting point to where it is at in terms of geographies, in terms of the offering, quite different. And of course, the landscape has changed also. Nobody anticipated COVID would come in. The AI changes in the AI landscape has been phenomenal over the time. The maturity of the impact investment space has been quite significant as well. So yes, night and day in terms of what I anticipated and what the reality was.
Did you have to be flexible in terms of like your thinking around it, right? Because you had a hypothesis and to make that decision, that conscious decision to pivot away from what you had. What was the thinking process that you and your co-founders has?
So yes, absolutely yes. As a founder, you need to be flexible and also be humble to understand or listen to advisors. So if you're lucky enough, you will get advisors who got the experience in the space. The challenge is around conflicting points of view, advice. How do you piece that together to decide what is the course of action? Because unlike a larger institution, you have limited resources and time is of the essence. If you miss the window that you get, somebody else would do it, or that opportunity is lost. So to identify the right opportunity at the right time and be ready to execute, that can be quite challenging. You have to be flexible at the same time, need to have a team who is ready to support you.
And you built that team. How long did it take you? And how long did it get you to actually bring that together?
So again, organic process. As we realized the needs, we identified the skills that were required. We brought that team on board. It was quite a journey to get to the steady state. And looking at the requirements, it can always be a case where you will not reach a steady state, or in our case, having this two personality organization required its own specific requirements around the financing side. The expertise being quite different from the technology side. And as all of us in Singapore know, in technology, it can be quite a challenge in the ecosystem to get talent competing with larger institutions. The Julius Baers and the Grabs of the world are also vying for the same talent. It can be quite a challenge. So need to be flexible in terms of maybe hiring across borders, balancing between senior and junior staff, different models in terms of part-time and full-time people, consultants, etc. So that took quite a bit of time to fine-tune.
Wow! So it's a bit of a dance, right?
Very
Trying
much.
to figure out you're throughout the conversation, even earlier with Laksh as well, right? I heard so many different countries that you're in. You're doing things in so many different places. How do you see the difference in the working style, the ecosystems in all these different geographies that you've encountered with GreenArc?
It's actually quite eye-opening and quite interesting, the various cultures that you see along the way, and culture, using the term quite loosely. When when you operate in various countries, there's a lot of interesting dynamic that you see. So the obvious one that comes to our mind is the two geographies that we have business entities in, and we do business development in, which is Southeast Asia, out of Singapore, and US. There are obvious similarities as developed countries between the two. At the same time, there are also striking differences that are there. To me, the biggest difference is around the appetite for risk in the US compared to Asia. What I've realized over the last, especially the last 2 or 3 years, is when you go into an organization with a pitch, pretty early you can recognize how likely is it that you will go into the next stages of the conversation. And in Asia, as we know, the risk appetite tends to be a lot more conservative. Larger institutions, governments certainly, and even financial institutions tend to go for the more established solutions. If you're a smaller or a fintech which are of a certain scale or below, it can be quite challenging to get even the decision makers to come to talk to you. This is a stark contrast that I've seen with the US, where you can go into a government organization, you can get a meeting with a governor or a senator, or if it is a financial institution with the C-level, they'll be ready to have the conversation and see, okay, this seems to be an interesting, innovative proposition. I don't have an alternative. Let me put some money. Let me do a bet on this horse. Let's try whether this works out. That risk appetite, that explains a lot of the entrepreneurial culture that you see in the Valley. Compared to maybe 5-10 years ago, Singapore is unrecognizably more risk-taking currently. And that is a journey I really hope for the future entrepreneurs, that this journey continues so that there is more appetite to try out new solutions, new entrepreneurs, what they are bringing to the table.
I mean, now it's a great time to be an entrepreneur now, right? I mean, there's access to technology, it's ability to be able to access to, capital as well, right? And being able to solve a lot of things with a lot of the new solutions.
Yes.
Would you do it again?
Certainly, I would do it again. The journey, while 6.5 years was quite intense, there's a lot of learnings that were there along the way. And there's the pluses far outweigh the negatives for me personally. There were a lot of people who helped me through the journey. There were a lot of learning points that were there. And the first time is always a lot more challenging. The hurdles are a lot more. You don't know what to anticipate, which is why VCs tend to back second-time founders a lot more. So love the journey and would love to identify another niche area and work on that.
Fantastic. And I'm going to ask you one last question before we wrap up. It's been an amazing conversation. It's the next big fin. What's next for GreenArc Capital?
Again, thanks for that question, John. We are going through a bit of a transition in GreenArc Capital. We are going through an exit process, then an M&A process for our impact measurement business. So there is a US-based company who are buying out our business. We are going through that exit process currently. So the NDAs are in place. So unfortunately, I can't give too much details of it. So at the same time, I do have a commitment to post the transition to ensure that the new entity can hold the reins well and they are steady on their reins, after which I will be free to look at the next journey.
Wow, that's fantastic. Congratulations on that. I mean,
Thank you, John.
Is perfect validation of, the solution you built. And, really exciting to hear. I'll stay posted. I would love to stay posted to hear about what comes next. Hopefully you get a little bit of a break before you embark on that next journey itself. But fantastic. It's been a great conversation,
Likewise,
Rony, and looking forward to let's see if there's we can keep the conversation going on this, right? Fantastic. Well, I think that's a wrap for this edition of the Next Big Fin. Stay tuned for some of join us for some of our other conversations with some amazing founders, and to hear a bit more about how they've been building their businesses and some of the challenges as well as the solutions that they are bringing to life to disrupt financial services.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.